Good morning and welcome to TOSP Conversations, a platform that brings perspectives from leading experts across diverse fields and ideas that are shaping today. TOSP Conversations is brought to you by the Outstanding Speakers Bureau, a service which works with hundreds of inspiring minds from across the globe who deliver experiential knowledge and cutting-edge insights for business. COVID-19, a pandemic that has thrust the world into more uncertainty than we have ever seen before. Amidst this, businesses have to adapt, realign, and reassess to keep being relevant at a time that has been testing and trying for all of us. Now, it's time to focus on long-term recovery. In this webinar with leading industry experts, we discuss the irreversible shift and systemic changes that will define the new business imperatives and how organizations and leaders can build a clear action plan for recovery from here onwards. I would like to thank NASSCOM Insights for being our industry partner for this conversation, and it's my pleasure to introduce our stellar panel for the day. Our first esteemed panelist today is Romal Shetty, President Consulting, Deloitte India. Romal is the president in the consulting function and a member of India executive team. He has 20 years of experience in advisory services across large-scale transformation programs covering the business and technology domain. Romal has worked in over 30 plus countries across the risk and consulting domains. His key focus areas are financial and operational turnaround experience, product innovation, revenue management, analytics, business continuity, risk management, cost reduction, managed services, and process reengineering. My God, that's some credentials. Welcome to the TOSP Conversation, Romal.
Hi, Kritik. Hi.
Joining Romal and our second speaker today is Namita Jain, Digital Transformation Practice Lead, NASSCOM Insights. Namita brings 13 years of strategic research and consulting experience, having worked with Gartner and Deloitte prior to her current role. Her areas of focus have been strategic alignment of business and IT organizations, IT strategic planning, portfolio transformation, and cost optimization and planning. In her current role, she leads the digital transformation practice and research initiatives across deep tech and digitalization of core industry sectors of the Indian economy. Welcome, Namita, to TOSP Conversation.
Thank you very much.
And in conversation with Romal and Namita and stringing this insightful discussion together as a moderator is Pankaj Mishra, journalist and co-founder Factor Daily. Factor Daily is a new age media company that focuses on making sense of technology and its impact on the society. Pankaj has worked across newsrooms of the Economic Times, Mint, TechCrunch, and Network 18. He started his career in 2000 and has been tracking the Indian IT industry since then. Pankaj also hosts the Outlier podcast at Factor Daily. Welcome to the TOSP Conversation, Pankaj, and I now hand over to take forward this insightful conversation to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Kriti. I'm really thrilled to be here. And first of all, I hope all of your loved ones are safe and well. These are challenging times. And the topic is so relevant. Almost every founder, every enterprise leader that I spend time talking with, they are now beginning to talk about a survivor's guide or a checklist to survive. Life on the other side and business on the other side is something everybody wants to learn more about. And this conversation is something I have always looked forward to because between Romal and Namita, we have a great expertise, and hopefully at the end of this conversation, the discussion, we will put together kind of a survivor checklist, which will have actionable insights and hopefully will serve as a kind of a handbook, a practical handbook for anyone who is looking to navigate through this crisis and build a better future. So this is what we are going to be doing today. I'm going to be inviting Romal and Namita for their opening address. They will set the agenda with some unique insights about things they see, very closely in terms of Indian enterprises, specific trends. After those agenda setting insights, we are going to get into some specific questions. And after we are done with a couple of rounds of questioning and probing and learning more, we are going to make all of you panelists and open it for questions from each one of you. So this is what we are going to be doing. And at the end of it, like I mentioned, my outcome is to kind of capture a survivor's checklist, a handbook that all of you can use. So with this, Roman, let's have you kind of set the agenda with what you see around you and the things that we should be focusing on. Over to you, Roman.
Thank you, Pankaj. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And as Pankaj mentioned, I hope all of you and your loved ones are safe and sound. What I'm really going to do very quickly is to just present a few slides in terms of what we're seeing from an overall India market perspective. What are some of the big shifts that we're seeing globally and in India? And finally, some recovery strategies that would be useful to sort of imbibe. So if you really move on to the first slide, one of the things that as Deloitte we do what is called as a consumer tracker. This is done across 15 different countries. It's done on a fortnightly basis. And there were some key insights that were coming out of this survey. One was, the survey there are two colors. If you see, one is of course, before 1 week before unlock 1.0 version. And one is, of course, last week. So this basically tracks how consumers are feeling. And India, for example, Indians are actually feeling more anxious. So, the first one is I'm more anxious than I was last week, which is so 40% more, whereas unlock 1 was 36%. And with the cases rising, that seems to be obviously increasing more. But what's interesting is the next second country that is there who's feeling more anxious is Belgium at 16%. And there are 4 or 5 other countries, but most other countries have stopped feeling as anxious as India. So clearly there is something that is happening in India. In terms of physical well-being, in terms of employment concerns, I think clearly, again, these are some key areas where concerns exist, continue to exist, and continue to increase. But the good part is people are more forthcoming about returning to workplace. So that's happening slowly, not much, but it is happening. Couple of areas of big concern clearly is financial concerns. I think whether it is in terms of making payments, upcoming payments, or whether delaying purchases, that trend is moving more into the red category. So people are becoming more anxious. Things have changed as far as taking a flight or attending events or staying at a hotel, but it is still less than 50%. Some interesting aspects is clearly there's a move towards online. So I think more and more customers are feeling comfortable with online. More and more customers are saying that they will even buy vehicles, for example, online. So normally we used to always have this philosophy of being physical, but I think that is changing as well. But the concern again is there is a little bit of, on the big purchases, there's a concern of spending a lot more, whereas in terms of more the discretionary purchases, clearly Indians are ready to spend more. So there's a good news in terms of consumer essential, but large capital purchases, people are a little bit more uncomfortable. And in terms of the travel bit of it is public transport, whether public transport or ride hailing, people are more conscious, are more anxious. But in terms of travel, it has improved. But again, like I said, it is far lesser than what we prefer it to be. Okay, moving on. This is really in terms of just some clear insights from India. But if I move on to the next slide, there are some big shifts that are happening globally, right? There are some shifts that were already there and some are actually accelerating. And I'll talk about a few of them. So first is really digitization. Every business wants to relook at how reimagine their entire business and say, how can they bring digital into every aspect of their business? And most importantly, not just change the way that they're operating today, but also in terms of how can they bring in a competitive advantage. The second bit is because of the anxiety that you saw in the previous slide, I think customers are more comfortable with having a direct to customer kind of model. So that is clearly something that is there. So there are more online business models. We're seeing traditional Indian companies who've always had a retailer franchisee kind of arrangement, very traditional, are now going into online and saying, oh, can I sell a pressure cooker? Can I sell something else directly to a customer? The third is really what we call as virtualization, which is the ability for anyone, anytime, anywhere to work with anyone without physical proximity. So that's changing. And this is again, MNCs have always had this thing of trying to be virtual, but a lot of Indian promoter companies have been more comfortable with the fact that you like face to face, but that is changing. So the worker, the workforce, and the workplace, all three things are changing. The fourth bit is the pandemic, unfortunately, is going nowhere as of now, because this may probably take maybe a year, because even if the vaccine is found, it will still take 5-6 months for most people to get, if not more. I mean, I'm talking about a minimum thing. So the supply chain resilience is extremely important. So supply chain in terms of procurement of material, or for example, delivery to a customer, that entire chain becomes, because today you don't know which city, which zone, which country goes into a lockdown. Suddenly you see in Australia, with the whole of Melbourne going into a lockdown. So clearly that is an important area. The other one is what companies have to start realizing is there an ecosystem? Can I not try to do everything myself? Can I work with someone else? I mean, this is a traditional old model. If you look at the telco companies, the tower companies, they actually competitors got together. These were hardcore competition there, but they got together. Similarly, are there others that you need to get into an ecosystem relationship? And lastly, the one I want to talk about is experiences. During this whole thing is the topic today is about recovering. And we have a framework, what we call as respond, recover, and thrive. Really great companies, what they would do is not just recover, but they would thrive. And how can you thrive in a scenario? And to give you an example, for example, if you take a furniture company, now using digital imaging technology, they can basically say how they can place a furniture in your drawing room and make it look how how does it actually appear to be, and then deliver it to you as well, right, online. So things like that. So really elevating the human experience. So really now we've looked at big shifts, we've looked at some of the anxieties. So what could be some recovery strategies? So if I move on to the next slide in terms of recovery strategies, they're really a combination of, if I take as consultants, we love everything into a in a matrix structure 3x3, but this is really in terms of depending on companies. So what we call a staying afloat. So if you take a hotel and airlines, these are all, for example, severely impacted. So if you look at the crisis impact, it's very severe. The readiness to thrive may not be that easy. So how do these just stay afloat, right, or change their business model? So hotels, for example, do they corporate customers used to be the largest segment, but now is dining and takeout will be the largest segment for them. So how do they move towards something like that? Or do you have virtual vacations, for example? Take it to a game park and actually show the entire thing virtually. Similarly, if you take real estate companies, for example, they would plan to, because they're high contact, a lot of physical need is there. So it will take some time. So how do you ensure during that time you plan to re-emerge and become much more stronger? On the other side, if you look at educational or training, for example, these were always done. There were online programs there, but this will now just take a big leap. It will really take a big step forward, and there'll be a lot more things done from that perspective. Similarly, if I look at, for example, what I call as riding the wave, is can I look at alternate business models? So can I move in, if I'm manufacturing, can I manufacture ventilators? Can I manufacture masks? Right? If I can I push my employees into, they used to sell cosmetics. Now, can they do virtual cosmetic selling, right? Which is very, very different from actually selling in. And these are all the examples are actual real life examples across the world, and a lot of it from China as well, because China went through this first. Then also looking at, for example, healthcare. Healthcare again has been a very high contact kind of a thing, but today with the digital technologies, with the Fitbits, the wearables, the meters that you can add on to your body, for example, a lot of analytics can actually help do telemedicine, and we can clearly see today, even in home quarantine, that is actually happening. And lastly, again, reinventing what I call is, even if you take auto dealers, how do you reinvent selling of auto? Where, because the last slide you saw, people are ready to buy online. So if you want to buy online, how would you virtually show an entire car, every part of the car, and customize that entire car for you without actually moving, without somebody actually having to do a test drive? So how would you do that? And of course, we do have the streaming giants that we clearly see as ones which will, big technology companies will, of course, will probably be the biggest beneficiary when it comes to these. So these are these are some recovery strategies, but it's not necessarily that each one is in isolation. They would actually be a combination of some of this. So not necessarily, people who only want to stay afloat, but they will want to maybe reinvent rapidly as well. And in terms of the three things that I'll specify it a little bit later is what we call as the workforce and workplace. So whether it's an IT industry, whether it's financial services, so some of the things that you can do. Do we really need so much real estate? Can we optimize the real estate? Do we really need so many branches? On every customer service that we do, how much of it can be touchless? So today, if you go to a fuel pump, you can fuel up your car, for example, without having to touch anything, virtually completely touchless, right, including the payments. Healthcare, how do you do, for example, any kind of, it's very interesting that today physiotherapies, which is a very, very high contact service, is now using very high-end algorithms to say what could really work. So it's a phygital environment. So I do think digital, of course, becomes extremely important, but physical will remain in India. So there will be a phygital combination as such. So these are some quick quick areas that I wanted to just talk in terms of the road to recovery. But importantly, companies that are, as I want to reiterate, that companies that want to go on this path should not just thinking about how do I recover, but should also think about how do I thrive. That how do I get into a competitive advantage? I think that's the opportunity, and you will see some companies go over the others during this time. So yes, Pankaj. So that's really what I had. Remarks.
Okay. No, this is really agenda setting, Romal. Thank you so much. Namita, if I could move to you and ask you to set some agenda here in terms of how do you see from where you sit from NASSCOM point of view and the enterprises in India, and then we can move forward.
Sure. Thank you so much, Pankaj. Just wanted to check, am I audible well?
Yes, I can hear you all right.
Okay. Wonderful joining TUSP and Romal and yourself. And I hope the panelists as well as the attendees are enjoying the session as much as I am. And this is going to be a great learning opportunity. So before I get to my slide, the way I kind of wanted to take this forward is really Romal has done a fantastic agenda setting for us in terms of paving the way for the road to recovery across what we've been observing within India, how the other countries where the pandemic hit earlier have started responding, recovering very, very cautiously though, right? So that's the word, caution. And then what are the strategies moving forward? And I think one thing that has come across all of this is that there are certain changes, there are certain shifts that are going to happen, whether at the mindset level, at the technology level, the way we work and the way we live and the way we combine the two together in the near term as well as the long term. And what's interesting, what's interesting observation across the last 4 to 6 months is how technology has played a role in all of this. So that's really where I wanted to bring a bit of our perspective as NASSCOM. We've been working with a lot of the technology companies first to kind of understand how they have been so resilient, quick, and responsive in kind of adapting to this entire pandemic, this black swan that was thrown upon them, in terms of moving people to remote working, quickly initiating everything from infrastructure provisioning to productivity to service delivery without a glitch, to the prospect of having to come back slowly, gradually, and maybe even evaluate a model where not everybody is back, but then how does it work, right? A much more integrated, blended work model in terms of in terms of tech enablement would be a fantastic thing to observe. So those are some of the things that we've been looking at. Definitely, this environment has been very difficult in terms of creating some kind of projections as to how the tech industry would behave and how the tech industry clients might behave, right? But one thing we've observed is there's a lot more inquiry into using tech. Companies that digitalized earlier, and when I say digitalized, it means having seamless processes, having mapped out those processes and not having them on paper or not managing their data and their systems on paper have been able to respond in a much better way, in a much smoother way. Companies that were able to kind of institutionalize, I would say, a little bit work from home by being very flexible early on could respond much faster. So there are aspects of technology that have enabled the response to COVID-19, and those technologies, when scaled up, will enable the road to recovery as well. And that's where we are watching. We are actively engaging with the industry, and we're trying to learn how these actions will come up. But now getting to my slide, the couple of things that we noted were strategic shifts, and I said these are going to be mindset as well as systemic work shifts. The kind of shifts that we are observing, and some of these Romal has covered very extensively, are really about how did companies approach this? They started with business continuity planning, and very quickly they realized that it's important that business continuity is not a one-off event. It's not an exception. It's actually business as usual. You always are ready for something that could be risky, that can go off, and your entire organization needs to be ready. So from BCP, which is business continuity planning, to business continuity management, as you go, as you operate, as you work in the normal. And what that probably means in terms of near term versus long term is we look at more work from home. We look at more work from home, which is glitch free in terms of business planning, but more business continuity management, optimization, use of certain technologies like AI, like ML, that can prescribe what kind of risk predictions are coming up and what kind of actions need to be taken. That probably is deeply intertwined with how work models evolve in terms of flexible workforce, extended work from home, as many companies we know, we've seen, have given it indefinitely, working from home permanently, or a sort of a very, very extended model for a large percentage of their workforce to kind of work from anywhere, which probably means, borderless movement. It also means borderless security in some ways, because that is one big area of concern when remote working was initiated. So how do we move from work from home, which is designated end nodes, to work from anywhere, which is completely borderless? That also leads to a lot of data, right? Now, what we are doing is integrating a lot of different devices into the mainstream working. So how do data capability providers, how do data solutions or data infrastructure providers respond to that in terms of setting up established data center locations to going hyperscale to kind of going very decentralized, distributed endpoint storage enablers? So we'll see that shift and we'll see how that goes. It's a massive exercise, because if we talk about the India context versus the global context, I think with India, a lot of organizations are now looking at putting their data on the cloud, which means a lot of standard stuff, getting mainstream, and then moving on to how do we respond to endpoint storage kind of situations where we, everybody, and our endpoint devices become part of a massive data grid. That kind of leads to, I think, in my mind, a lot of emphasis on cloud and variant kind of cloud models, from the ones that are very popular today but are limited to hybrid, to becoming multi-cloud, to becoming cloud where and whenever you require. So we are talking about how do we enable clouds at the edge points or the endpoints. There is a fog layer in between where you kind of localize it to certain endpoint devices, and then you kind of transmit data to a central cloud. But is that fixated? Can we make it flexible? We'll probably have cloud providers and cloud solution providers experiment with those models as well. And then one probably very, very big and very important aspect to it is trust. And when I say trust, it's not just cybersecurity, it's actually trusted transactions. It's trusting or enabling trust with every endpoint that is connecting to your data flow? What level of endpoint security, what level of trust algorithms do you want to provision at that endpoint? And how do we make that entire thing work seamlessly? Because these can be very heavy in terms of compute power. So how do these things come together to deliver the same experience in a very responsive way? And I think with all of this, the one thing that stood out for me and many of the companies that we've spoken to with the whole work from home was how do we move people but trust them to be productive? How do we know that we are not intruding too much, with putting checkpoints at every place in the name of productivity, for lack of a better term? And that's where I read this and I found this very interesting, that it's going to be empathy over efficiency. And how do we balance that? So I know, and I think Romal mentioned this, that in times of these, in testing times, leadership is very important, as well as ownership is also very important. So probably the contours of leadership as well as individual ownership of how they come forward in a self-governing way is going to change. Obviously, technology is going to be an enabler across, but these would be interesting to see. So these were just some of the things that I wanted to highlight in continuation to what Romal had discussed. But there are many, many more shifts, and none of these, I believe, are set in stone. It's a very evolving situation. As this pandemic evolves, probably the learnings from this will be the first time that we'll see any systemic shift in the way we operate.
This is really agenda setting, Namita. I mean, what you talked about, empathy over efficiency, and the shift in terms of AI and ML are very well captured. Romal, if I may, come to you now, and you shared a very comprehensive framework and also identified very interesting trends from what Deloitte sees. Can you spend a minute or two talking about, a company or any particular case study to speak of, just to illustrate what really is going to work, or what won't work, just to help us understand the structure that you shared with a real example, if you can.
So maybe I'll share a couple. So one of the things is, if you really look at travel's probably one of the worst hit in terms of the pandemic. It was the first to be hit, and probably it will be the last to recover. That's how it goes by. And if you look at, and if I take within that, I take the travel portals, for example, that's again been, because they completely depend on the whole travel business. So, with travel going in, they will, what we really saw is that really, and I'm talking about an Indian example, is to say that they realize that this is going to be the trend for the next whatever time. So, but you can't shut your operation and say, we'll fold down. They felt, what are our biggest strengths? And they said one of our biggest strengths is making products and software. It's really a strength. So can we tilt away from making purely from just relating to travel portals to actually helping build software for companies, right? So that's the big tilt of really doing something like that. Or if you take, like I said, auto companies have tremendously, had a massive hit. So they've really looked at the fact of saying that, how do I now probably manufacture ventilators, right? And a number of ventilators have actually come in from auto companies, or large manufacturing companies, agri commodity manufacturing, have got into sanitizers, right? So, or the big cosmetic guys have got into PPE kits. So it's about tilting, because the ability to be nimble, agile, and say you have strengths, and you have strengths beyond what you do in your core. You have a lot of strengths which are related to your core. How do you take that? So maybe those are a couple of examples which we've seen companies adopt.
Namita, you talked about digitization, and you also touched upon the more digitized you are, perhaps you are better prepared, and we all get that. And we are seeing that this particular event is also forcing a massive shift, which you talked about, towards digitization. Now, is there a checklist for from what you see in terms of enterprises that are digital savvy, who are prepared, and who are not prepared, what would that journey be? What is a sane way to take that journey? Because if it's an old world enterprise or someone not as digital savvy, you can really get lost in a situation like this. So anything in particular that you have picked that can help companies make this transition and embrace it really truthfully?
Sure. Very, very pertinent question, Pankaj. Because what it requires probably right now in the given context is a little bit of prioritization. So while companies, while it's easy for us to say that digitalization is the answer, what really is the priority? So I think where it begins is looking at what are the most important or significant or critical touch points that a company has from a customer standpoint that need to be preserved at every cost. How does an organization and its current technology strategy get affected with varying levels of digitalization? So I could take up a vertical or a horizontal process and initiate some kind of a digitalization. But is that probably a priority, and B, how quickly can that get done? So looking at prioritization from a quick win to a short term to a long term, and kind of staging the process is going to be the way forward. I think more importantly than anything, big bang or boiling the ocean. Now, when I say that, let me take one example. We've seen the supply chain side and the manufacturing side very, very badly hit, right? These have been very challenging for them. Things have been broken, both from the procurement side as well as downstream to the customers. Things have really been broken in terms of the overall supply chain. One of the things that, if I take the Indian context, is where the SMEs or the MSMEs in the manufacturing space find it difficult to take the next step to digitalize. Where should they begin? There are a plethora of things that they can fix upstream, downstream, everywhere. So I think if we just break it down to look at their entire value chain and figure out what is the most important thing they need to do, where they are most importantly hit right now is getting a sense of where the demand is, right? That's a little ambiguous, that is a little vague. Second, how can they quickly get to utilizing the existing capacity and in a very predictable way? Also in a very adaptive way, given the limitations of the workforce, as well as the kind of vagueness that exists in the market in terms of knowing exactly whether I'll sell or not sell, right? And thirdly, in terms of the next step could be, if I have a little bit of capital room to play, where exactly should I put and how much? Can there be some intelligence to that? So probably if I were just to break it down, I'm just taking an example of an industry, but I think different sectors will have to look at that prioritization when they put capital to a digital transformation initiative. How quickly can they get returns? And is that the most important and urgent priority right now?
Yeah, that's very well said. One thing I wanted to learn from both of you, and there is a relevant question here as well from Sumit, is we all know this too shall pass. We keep telling ourselves, and this is temporary. The pandemic itself. What, according to both of you, and I'll start with Romit, perhaps, are going to be permanent shifts when it comes to the digitization or even virtualization? What are the things that you believe are going to be there, for a long time, or whatever is the definition of permanence, right? So, what do you see that is going to stay for a really long time? What are some of those permanent shifts? You want to start from it?
Yeah, sure. So, so a couple of things. I think one is, I don't think we will ever see business travel, and I'm distinguishing from leisure travel. Business travel probably will never be the same, or will never get to the same thing, at least in the next 2 to 3 years. Nobody knows later, but 2 to 3 years, I don't see that. So therefore, people will have to figure out how they can work virtually. So I think that's a permanent shift that is happening in terms of behavior, both at a consumer behavior as well as business leaders. The second thing I think is related to that, and I do think the pandemic from an India perspective is probably one of the biggest opportunity for us from a diversity perspective, which is whether it is gender, whether it's any of the other diversity. I do think that this will enable, and when I say diversity, even working from rural areas, because some of them don't have mainstream access, but this will actually enable India more to get into Bharat, really, in some sense. I think that's what is going to happen. And just the digital savviness of consumers, of everybody. I mean, today virtually everybody seems to be knowing what's happening on the COVID, what's happening on various things. So whether your smartphones or that will just revolutionize even further. So more medium through your laptops, through your devices, much more compared to what probably has been. So maybe those are two, three big shifts that I do see, and permanent shifts.
Namita, what you think are going to, or apart from the ones that Romal talked about?
Sure. I'll kind of qualify my answer, India versus global. And coming to India first, I think one thing that we've definitely seen is, and that's a very specific example, is digital payments go up. So we've been so probably lucky to have the right kind of access to marketplaces online, to capabilities that we can buy online, that probably it's been a big savior for everybody. And what I see is a lot of that getting very, very mainstream into the deeper parts of India, getting more widespread with more diverse options. Because that is one thing that everybody from the government to the players in the fintech area, to the established organizations, even our traditional BFSI have realized that that is one way to go. So digitalization of payments, and what that means is a lot of boost for the app economy. So that definitely is something that I'm going to that I think will be a very significant permanent thing from an India perspective. The reason I say India, and I took India as an example, is because we are growing very fast. We are probably growing more than 100% in all of these areas, but we are still far behind when it comes to the perspective vis-a-vis the global participation in digital payments. The second, I think I wanted to kind of take that point from Romal forward, which is inclusion and mainstreaming of the parts of India and the entrepreneurship aspects of India that have never come to the fore. And I think, again, digital has a big role to play. Because if I have individual entrepreneurs, not even micro, these are you and me sitting at home trying to make very interesting things, then how do we make sure that everybody else has access to it and that they have visibility and a very sustainable business model? And probably that is going to be one big shift if digital as well as online marketplaces are put to good use. From a global perspective, I think probably the obvious ones, as I mentioned, are things around data and cloud. Now, what that will do is eventually that will lead us to a lot more acceptance of deep tech. There have been a lot of questions around automation, AI, all of these technologies taking jobs away. And I think COVID created the right kind of platform to showcase that these can be lifesavers. From a robotic machine kind of serving patients in the hospitals in a very contactless way, freeing up doctors, making them more safe to continue serving, to drones helping authorities do surveillance, to a lot of AI that could go into answering the fact that how can we come up with a vaccine much sooner than the previous pandemics? Or how can we even preempt treatments for future pandemics? Can we actually foresee certain things? So those are going to be fantastic examples. I do see deep tech overall becoming very, very important, very mainstream. I think people will start embracing the fact that these are going to be enablers rather than attackers, to our jobs and to our lives.
Very well said, Namita. Very well said. Roman, there is a question from in our session, which is I think you can address it a lot better. Is about the policy makers and how can they really aid this whole corporate and industry recovery. If you were to look at this through the lens of road to recovery that we are talking about, what do you think can policymakers do? What specifically can they do if you were to handpick 2, 3 things?
Sure. So I'll bring in a couple of things in terms of, again, a global and an India perspective from India, but when I say global. So let's take a number of multinational companies are looking at a China plus one strategy, right? Some cases alternate to China, some cases China plus one. As a government, can we focus on saying what are some of those sectors that have a global trade? I mean, the clearly sunrise sectors, what probably were in China, and link back to what was it that in India did we have the capacity for some of those sectors and capability for those sectors? Maybe we were smaller, obviously we're smaller compared to China, but did we have capability to take chemicals, for example? So can we be something like that? And say, do we also have an do we also have a domestic market for it? So both a export market we'll look at as well as a domestic market. So take those sectors, don't go behind every sector. Take 7 or 8 sectors and say, can you woo those multinational companies to come into India and have an alliance, have a joint venture, have any of that stuff. Second is, for example, how would you? My clear belief is that India has. There are many things, but since you asked for a couple of points, I say there are 2 areas that I would like. India is clearly known as technology prowess. We clearly have. Can we now move on to the data science, being the data science hub of the world? And what will us, which means much more higher levels of education and everything else is required to actually get into that. But can we become the data science hub of the world? And similarly, can we get agri-tech into agriculture? Because remember, 52% of our people are employed in agriculture, giving us 16-17%. So can we get agri-tech into agriculture and become, for example, the food bowl of the world? Because pandemic or no pandemic, everybody has to eat. And we have a large workforce that's not going to change overnight. And third, I mean, we've spoken, the government speaks about the ease of doing business, but the general view is that it is difficult sometimes to do business in India. So what do you really do? How do you really make competitive things? And industry, can you have a concept of cluster industry? That means that I don't just get one automaker, but I get the whole cluster along with them. All right. So that, and if you create industrial townships, which are beyond the metro cities, right? I think those would be really, really successful. So those probably are 2, 3 things very quick on what the policymakers can do.
Great, Namita. If I can come back to you, you made some very interesting points about deep tech, and very important points about how those companies would be looked at, especially in those areas, and not aggressors or disruptors in that sense who you should be always fearing. Now, with where we are, what do you think this will mean for startups who have been for a long time trying to work with larger enterprises? Do you think that would change, or do you see that change already happening? Because while there are large vendors for most of these digitization tools and building blocks, there is a massive startup ecosystem, including the SaaS ecosystem that you touched upon. How do you think their lives are going to change when it comes to Indian enterprise buying? Because they have been, some of them have never even focused on India market, and those who did don't have really great stories to share. So how do you think their lives are going to change?
Sure. I think a very, very interesting question, Pankaj. So, yeah, you're right. A lot of startups operate for markets outside India, but there are some very, very fantastic examples that have emerged. And particularly, I'll take this pandemic situation as an example. I personally know of examples of people who kind of, literally set up something in a garage within their home and cranked out a ventilator. And they're working with the government, and they are in the process of getting approvals to then produce more ventilators and even get to export those ventilators, because it's a very short format ventilator, very robust, and all of those things, right? So you see the point that what this has done, what this pandemic has done is two things. One, I think it has created a lot of confidence in the Indian startup ecosystem, and not only just the startup ecosystem, even the MSME system, that kind of took their production lines, for example, and completely transformed it to say, we're going to make sanitizers tomorrow, we're going to make PPE kits and ventilators. So that confidence has been a significant achievement, that we can do it and we can deliver it. And I think it's resonant even in probably some of the upcoming government policies. And that could be a very big boost to policies that are enabling, that are in the right direction. One. Second, I think there'll be a lot more activity because the startups have come up, and Romal mentioned agriculture. That's a fantastic example. We were just concluding a study on how AI and IoT are making their way into agriculture. Beyond the agri-tech startups, even the enterprises are now making solutions. So I think one of the things that is beginning to happen is a realization and opening up of even the end consumer that some of these things are not averse, that things that have been successful outside India can actually work in India also. It's a matter of awareness, it's a matter of training, it's a matter of initiative. So from that perspective, I do see a lot of startup activity. I also see a lot of startups who have very good solutions are struggling to take it commercial, are struggling to prove, proof not the concept, but the proof of test out there in the market, being actually tied up with enterprises. So a lot of M&A activity has been a little latent from the enterprise side, and I do see that picking up, especially with deep tech startups.
No, that's very well put, Namita. I mean, it's very, very refreshing to hear, because one of the things is in any disaster, we are all looking for those glimmers of hope. And this clearly is such glimmer. Now final round of insights from both of you. And I would start with you, Roman, because I think you made a very, very interesting point when you talked about not just survivor's checklist, but also thriving. And to me, that is going to be really critical where we are. If you were to look at a checklist to thrive, what would be what it would be have? What are 3-5 things or a couple of things that a checklist for thriving should have according to you?
Okay, so maybe I'll take that first. So a couple of things. I think there are two things that are required, and I'll address it at both at an organization level, which is a leadership level, and then at a specific organization. So the first most important thing is to change the mindset. Change the mindset that the situation today is unpredictable. To say, okay, this is the normal. How do we sort of move forward? How can we change our focus from being inward looking to being more market facing? How can we be more from crisis management to more program management? How can we start looking at from contingency planning to scenario planning? So this is important. Just the mindset is extremely critical, because until the mindset changes, we will still be in a crisis mode. The second thing is to be very certain about being uncertain. So clearly there are, what do I mean by that? There are clearly changes in customer behavior. There are changes in terms of financing and capital. There are changing roles and rules of work, the expectations from society, right? The expectations from on a safety basis. The third is, Namita mentioned about trust. Trust is extraordinarily critical, and I break trust really into 3 or 4 parts. One is a physical trust that for my employees and for my workforce, for my consumers, right, that the physical space is safe. The second one is really that the financial concerns are being well served. The third, Namita has mentioned in great detail, is a digital trust, which is your information is secure. And finally, the emotional trust. This is going to lead to a lot of emotional imbalances. So how do you ensure that the emotional quotient, emotional needs of people are safeguarded? The second one I would really say is from an organization perspective, and I break it into really 7 parts, right, and which is really the recover and thrive. The first is really how do we ensure the safety and well-being of our employees through whether it's social distancing, whether it's employee triaging, whether it's crisis management, things like that, business continuity, and Namita mentioned about business continuity management and optimization. Second is how do we retain customers? So what I call as an defense strategy and what I call as an offense strategy, which is how to increase revenue. So how in this scenario can we look at alternate models? Can we look at alternate customers? Can we look at how to have a greater reach? Today, can I use digital marketing than traditional marketing to ensure, because everybody's on a phone, everybody's on a laptop, how can I reach them much more effectively? So what kind of customer segmentation can I do? Third is re-looking at the supply chain resilience, because supply chain will get impacted. So how do you ensure that your supply chain doesn't get impacted and therefore you have alternate sources? Fourth is really in terms of your financing, whether it's a great time. I mean, if you've sort of we've done an analysis on various crises, whether it's the Lehman crisis, whether it's the world wars, different things. Interesting aspect is some of the companies made significant M&As during this time because you have a lot of distressed assets, good assets, but distressed assets. So can you really buy them? So that's really the fourth. The fifth is really the new normal in terms of the workforce and organization structure. So talent remodeling, reskilling, for example, organization restructuring, all of those things would be very important. So the new age skills would be very different from traditional skills. So how do you get your people up to speed? The sixth is a lot of things which Namita spoke is really about scalable, secure, and accelerated technology, whether it's virtualization, whether it's accelerated digital transformation, data privacy, cyber preparedness, all of that things. And lastly is we live in a world of regulations. With all of this, there will be a number of changes in terms of regulations. So how do you ensure that you are working with regulators and in sync with regulation? Because or regulation may be a bit behind, but how do you ensure you manage all your compliances even with all these changes? So these, I would say, are 6, 7. But most important is the mindset has got to change to say that can we reimagine our business? Can we reinvent our business models? And like I said, even like a cloud, is cloud an opportunity to migrate from premises to off premises, or is it an opportunity to completely change the business model and reimagine your business? So things like that. So those I would say are key aspects in terms of the from a thrive, recover, and thrive scenario.
No, that's very well said, Romal, again. And for me, the key here is the thriving that you're talking about, and not just survival. Namita, coming to you for the final round of insights, there are a couple of things. Of course, do share your survivors checklist, at the end. But one question I had, which I see on my window as well, which is you talked about digital readiness for enterprises. And we also discussed about diversity, not just gender, but overall. Now, the question here is in this changing talent landscape with work from home and so on, and the leadership that is required, how ready you think are these enterprises when it comes to diversity? Because that is not a checkbox anymore from what I am picking from you, right? So what is your observation? What is your idea on that?
Sure, sure. And Pankaj, I'm going to probably comment on this in terms of diversity overall. There are certain aspects of diversity that we've kind of made a very conscious effort towards, right? And probably the work from home makes it a little more easy. So when I talk about women inclusion, it's a little easier. It's an easier model because you save a lot of time. You kind of allow that multitasking to happen. You kind of allow that familiar environment of home where if the entire family is at home, then there is a consciousness, there's an anxiety that gets curbed, and so there's eventually high productivity. But the bigger aspect of diversity is more from the perspective of we have a workforce coming from all kinds of locations, right? And that is also what I want to emphasize on. These are all kinds of economic backgrounds. These are all kind of probably situations at home, conditions, living conditions at home. And the thing that probably the most important thing that leadership and not just leadership, let's not put it to leadership alone, but for everybody, for you and me, for every colleague, to be very cognizant of is that we live in environments where adaptation is the most important thing, right? So I kind of came upon this quote that I want to read because I think it kind of sums up everything that Rommel said. It kind of sums up the whole idea of thriving, but it also sums up the idea that we can't thrive unbridled. There's a bit of a caution, because COVID-19 is still around. We are still in those conditions which we are not used to, but we'll get used to. There's still hope because we are all collectively making progress towards adjusting to it. So this is Donald T. Einan, and he says, these are not days for unbridled optimism, but this is the perfect time to allow hope to arise in our spirits. So summing up my response to your question that there's no easy answer to how leadership will adapt to that, to the whole diversity question. It's not diversity and inclusion the way we've known and the way we've classified generally in our L&D setups. It's diversity of working conditions, of where you are, what condition you are in, and how important can you make the other person feel in the way they are, contributing to work. How adaptive can we be? At the end of the day, I think what will matter for organizations is more and more productivity, probably not more and more hours or a very visible number of not the quantity but the quality of it.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I mean, do type your quote in the chat window because it's a great quote to reference back. We have few minutes left, and I can see a couple of questions there as well. Roman, if I can come to you. We discussed leadership and we discussed the business balancing human crisis and business crisis as Shreya, who is asking the question, is articulating. Now, are there any indicators, Romal, for a leader when to prioritize what? Now, I have heard of so many models that entrepreneurs used, but in your mind, do you have anything that you can share in terms of how to prioritize?
I think one against the other probably is a very difficult one. But what we really say is resilient leaders think think from the mind and heart, and not necessarily only think from either one. It's both are important because business sustainability is extremely critical, right? So that is important. But at the same time, what you do with your employees, what you do with your customers will last a lifetime. And that is the impact that you can make. So it's very difficult to prioritize one over the other. I would actually say both are extremely important. But good leaders don't necessarily only think from their minds, it's also from their heart.
Yeah, very, very well said. It's amazing how we are talking a lot about emotional resilience and we are discussing road to recovery. While normally we would think of building blocks would be more infrastructural or some of those things. So that's fascinating. One question for you as well, Namita, is this is something we all discuss. Like, if you are not sharing physical workspaces, how do you emotionally bind with people? We are missing coffee, lunch, all those conversations. But this is going to become, a deep, study of workplaces going forward. But from where we are, how do you think companies and leaders can emotionally connect with their teams?
Sure. And I think we're seeing quite a few things being done, right? So just a couple of days back, we had our virtual on-video cake cutting birthday sessions. So that's kind of the parallel to water cooler conversations. But yes, in terms of engagement, right from the top, and this time I think it starts from the top, which is the leadership really opening up the channels of communication, connecting with the colleagues and the entire workforce as and when they can, in which format they can. So these are not likely to be very structured format. The one thing that we'll have to let go of is very structured town halls and events that we are used to, where the leadership comes on board. I think we've all seen examples where things have been a little unstructured but more contextualized. So it totally depends on, and it flows down from there. So, right from project teams engaging a lot more on daily stand-ups, we've all kind of gotten into that Scrum mode, where we do daily stand-ups every day, to moving up. So I think all kinds of aspects there. It's not just an HR and L&D initiative. It's the entire organization looking out for each other is what we've seen work more effectively.
Great. I mean, I'm the other reason I'm thrilled in these times is we just finished at 12:30, which is just in time. I will definitely put together a checklist. It's a very enlightening conversation. So thanks, Romal and Namita, to you, both of you. I'll be honest, most of the times when we are told that you have to talk to a researcher, we think of, okay, so is it going to be going all over my head or something? But I'll be very bluntly honest. This was really refreshing. I loved the actionable insights. And for me, the key takeaway from this is, the road to recovery is not just going to be about business resilience, or while those are definitely going to be hygiene, but it's more about the emotional resilience, whether it's leadership or the fabric of the organization itself. So yeah, I wish all of us on this conversation and beyond have that. So over to Kriti and team for closing remarks. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much to our esteemed panelists and Romal and Namita for taking out your time and giving us such insightful data points and thoughts on the road to recovery, which all of us need as organizations and leaders. A heartfelt thank you from everyone at the Outstanding Speakers Bureau. And thank you, Pankaj, for stringing the conversation so beautifully. It comes so naturally to you. So thank you so much. And thank you to all the participants who logged on to the WebEx and also were logged on to the YouTube channel for live conversation updates. So once again, thank you, everyone. And the Outstanding Speakers Bureau will soon be sharing key insights from this conversation. So if you are not already subscribing to our newsletters, please do that. And you should, if you have missed any insightful points, you should get them. So thank you once again. Stay safe and be good.
Thank you.
Thank you.